Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Las Vegas Summer League starts today for the Timberwolves. I'll tell you who to watch in Vegas, who to keep an eye on in Vegas. Quick scouting reports on the Wolves draft picks that will be playing, the undrafted rookies, the Exhibit 10 guys, and what to watch over the weekend in Vegas. It's all upcoming on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Happy Friday, happy weekend, and happy start to the Las Vegas Summer League. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Plenty to touch on, who to be familiar with on the roster, and we'll have real live kind of sort of Timberwolves basketball here this weekend. First of all, big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Locked On Wolves is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms, whether it's Apple or Google, Spotify, or Odyssey. You can find this show. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with two B's, two E's, Cken. All right. So the only Timberwolves news is that Karl-Anthony Towns signed his, I should say, like actual Timberwolves, not summer Timberwolves. Well, it's kind of a separate category in a way. But Karl-Anthony Towns signed his extension officially on Friday. The Timberwolves announced that. So he signed a supermax that gets added on to his current years. So he'll be with the Wolves for essentially a half decade for longer. And so that's awesome. Great to see the Wolves do a bunch of, recap highlight type videos celebrating him. So that's really good to see. Today, I want to spend most of our time talking about the Summer League and just getting ready because there are 3 Timberwolves draft picks playing in Vegas. There's also a couple of intriguing undrafted guys. I did a quick roster overview a couple of days ago here on the show. So I'm not going to go through every player on the roster here today. I just want to spend a couple minutes on the guys who I really want to keep an eye out for. There also were a couple of additions too. Since of course Walker Kessler was traded, and there was another change too, and I'm blanking now on what that was, but there were a couple of changes to the roster, and so there's a couple of additions to the roster. So I think what I want to do is just kind of go through the different categories of players that are on the roster to keep an eye out for quickly, and then mentioning the 2 new guys that are on the roster, and then we'll dig a little bit deeper into some of these players. So obviously the 3 draft picks on the roster, Wendell Moore, Matteo Spagnolo, and Josh Minet, and we'll talk a little bit more about each of those guys here in a minute because right after the draft, obviously we profiled them. I had Raphael Barlow on from NBA Draft Big Board, and we talked about those guys, but if you missed those shows or if you've forgotten because it's been 10 days, 2 weeks, whatever, I want to hit those quick. There's a couple of guys from last year's Iowa Wolves G League team, Matt Lewis, Brian Bowen. Brian Bowen was a former 2-way player for the Pacers and is actually kind of fits a role that the Wolves don't have on their current roster. I don't think he's going to be on the Timberwolves roster this year. Maybe he's got a shot at a 2-way, but he's kind of that prototypical 3 who could be a little, maybe not a full 2-way player, but a plus defender, can guard threes, is long and lanky and mobile. The Wolves don't have a ton of those guys on their roster, right? Jalen Noel is primarily a 2, really only a 2. He's not a 3 at all. Taurean Prince, Kyle Anderson are both better fits at the 4 than they are at the 3 in terms of, and yes, in Chris Finch's offense, there's not a big difference between the 2, the 3, the 4 for the most part. It's really more cross-matching with opponents defensively, right? Do you have to cross-match? What do those matchups look like? So I just want to throw that out there that Brian Bowen is somebody with NBA experience who's on the Summer League roster, who's been a 2-way player before, played for the Pacers at the NBA level. Somebody perhaps to keep an eye on. He'll surely start in Vegas for the Wolves. Some Exhibit 10 guys, which again are basically preferred, I don't know, preferred G League players, right? So they get a bonus if they stay with the Wolves. They'll likely be in training camp, and then a bonus if they stay with the Iowa Wolves G League team. And then like a guaranteed salary that's a little higher than your standard G League salary. So Phillip Wheeler, we talked about a little bit, and we'll talk more about him later. Keyvon Harris is another one. And then players with NBA experience. Marielle Sheak is really intriguing. We'll spend a couple of minutes talking about him. Deante Burton has NBA experience. Melvin Frazier Jr. And then there's some undrafted guys. We talked a little bit about David McCormick the other day, the big from Kansas. he's a name to keep an eye on, just because he played at a big school. He'll probably get some good minutes. George Condit, the fourth from Iowa State. He's probably more of a depth guy. I'm not sure much he'll play. Khalil Whitney's another undrafted rookie type guy. And then a couple that are new additions to the roster that I want to talk about. Jordan Tucker, who has a little bit of G League experience. So he's not, he's a couple years out of school. And also, or I'm sorry, no, Jordan Tucker is not right out of school. Jordan Tucker Yeah, Jordan Tucker played at Butler a couple of years ago. So he is a new addition to the roster, has played a little bit in the G League. Jacob Gilliard is a current undrafted rookie who played 5 years at Richmond. And we'll talk more about him here in a second too, because I think he's kind of intriguing actually. And then Terrell Brown Jr. is another addition to the roster who is an undrafted rookie. And he's a guard out of Washington. And had transferred to Washington from Arizona, started his college career at Seattle, and maybe not as exciting of a prospect as a couple of these other guys, but he's another depth guy, undrafted guy on the roster. So what I want to do now is talk about the Wolves rookies and then a couple of other players to watch out for you may not be familiar with throughout the Vegas Summer League. So let's start with Wolves rookies, and then I'll pull out probably three guys to look at that are not actual Wolves roster players for the Timberwolves actual roster. So we'll do that here in a second. First, let's talk about our friends over at Truebill. Do you know why free trials renew without your consent? It's a business scam out to get you. Don't let greedy corporations pocket your money. Download Truebill to take control of your subscriptions. Truebill is the new app that helps you identify and stop paying for subscriptions you don't need, want, or simply forgot about. On average, people save up to $720 per year with Truebill. Because companies make subscriptions hard to cancel, Truebill makes it incredibly simple. Just link your accounts and Truebill will cancel your unwanted subscriptions in just one tap. And your Truebill concierge is there when you need them to cancel unwanted subscriptions so that you don't have to. Truebill has over 2 million users and has helped save them over $100 million. Like Matthew B., who says, in a matter of seconds, I saved $660 for the year on my DirecTV bill, saved $120 for the year on my SiriusXM bill, and saved $840 a year on car insurance. Don't fall for subscription scams. Start canceling today at truebill.com/LockedOnNBA. Go right now to truebill.com/LockedOnNBA. Could save you thousands a year. Truebill.com/LockedOnNBA. All right, Wolves fans tuning into Summer League are no doubt looking to see the rookies. So let's talk about them. Those are the guys that we really want to see. No idea how much Matteo Spagnolo will play, the second-round pick, who will play the year in Italy overseas and not be stateside. Tim Connolly said as much after the draft. But Wendell Moore Jr. and Josh Beinet will certainly see heavy minutes. If you missed it, real quickly on Wendell Moore, basically my read on him is he's essentially what I would call a two-way role player. He's 6'5", 7-foot wingspan. He should be, I mentioned earlier, the Wolves don't really have a prototypical three on the roster. He may be the guy. I just don't know that he'll get heavy minutes early. I think Taurean Prince and Kyle Anderson will kind of piece that combo forward spot together for the Timberwolves this year, early on at least. But Wendell Moore Jr., 6'5", 7-foot wingspan, pretty good 3-and-D guy in college at Duke. He wasn't a great shooter until his last year at Duke, his junior season. He shot 41% on threes. Prior to that, he was well under 40%. He was like, I think he had a season below 30% even. But his last year, junior year, 41% on threes. He was a 52% catch and shoot 3-point shooter. Obviously, he's not going to be playmaking a ton for the Wolves. They may ask him to do that in Summer League and just see how he looks with the ball in his hands. But I think the NBA level, his role is going to be catch and shoot, maybe a little bit as a cutter. He's a really good pick and roll defender with his length and his mobility. He can guard ball handlers, get through screens. He's physical enough to fight through screens and use his length to contest jumpers. My comp for him on the defensive end of the floor, he reminds me a little of Josh Okogie with the way he plays. But overall, Josh Richardson is kind of the comp for me, with maybe not quite as much. I don't know that he'll ever have Richardson at that 1.5, 2 seasons where he was really good offensively. I don't know that Wendell Moore will ever be like a 16, 18 point per game scorer, but he can put the ball in the basket from deep. He's a good enough athlete to be effective in transition and as a cutter. But he's just got a really good build too with the 7-foot wingspan. So he's probably the best player all around on this roster. He would be the one to most keep an eye out for. And of course, he's the one with the best path to minutes for the real Timberwolves this season. So obviously keep an eye on him. Josh Minott, the second-round pick, 6'8", 6'11" wingspan, off the charts athleticism. And and remember, he's the one, he played at Memphis and he didn't do much in his 1 year there, right? He was kind of a fringe rotation guy, saw some more minutes as the year went on, wasn't even a regular starter, but it's all about projectability because of his athleticism and size. The steal and block rates are completely unbelievable in college, which are always a positive thing, especially really kind of the bigger the player is physically, the more that steal and block rates translate to the NBA, which is interesting. Um, because, or especially steal rates, I should say, steal rates for big men and, big forwards like Minet are actually pretty telling with what they can do at the NBA level related to anticipation, their size, their lateral quickness, their ability to understand opposing offenses, etc. He's really good at playing passing lanes. He's got great instincts. I would imagine Summer League can get sloppy sometimes. He's the type of player, I have a feeling Josh Minet could, if he gets the minutes, and he very well could start, could, in a sense, go off as much as Josh Minott can go off, because Summer League gets sloppy and Minott can take advantage of that. He can have some highlight dunks, some lob, finishes. So keep an eye on Josh Minott. He's absolutely not a rotation player for the Timberwolves this year, but he's either going to get a non-guaranteed deal or a partially guaranteed deal on the roster, or he will be on a two-way contract. So he will be on the roster in some form or fashion this year. He just won't be in the rotation. The other thing is he's a really good rebounder, has great upside there, a great motor. And the Wolves roster doesn't have, for as much as, everybody thinks about the young Wolves, there isn't all that much like true pure athleticism on the Timberwolves roster. It's pretty much Anthony Edwards and Jaden McDaniels, and that's kind of it, especially now with no Jared Vanderbilt, even no Malik Beasley. Like they don't have that many plus athletes, and Minot would add that. He would add that kind of a little bit smaller, but almost that Brandon Clark type edge on the glass sort of a thing a couple years down the road. So watch him on the glass, watch him in the passing lanes, watch him finishing in transition and, lobs in the half court. But Josh Minott, Summer League could be his jam as a not as experienced player as some of the other guys on the court, but someone who has the athleticism and size to make a true impact. Spagnolo, I have no idea how much Matteo Spagnolo will play. Of course, he's going to be played professionally overseas in Italy this year. The Wolves said he won't be stateside. He was the 50th pick in the draft, or at least a year away from seeing him in the United States permanently, I guess, with the Timberwolves. So it's interesting he's at Summer League. I'm sure the coaches just wanted to get their eyes on him and work with him and see what he looked like in an NBA offense. So I'll be fascinated to see if he does play. I could see them not playing him and just kind of having him along for the ride, but there really isn't anything to lose by playing him either. So hopefully he plays. But Spagnolo is 6'5", 6'8" wingspan. He's actually best at creating his own shot. He's kind of I think he's more of a two guard than a point guard. Raphael Barlow from Lockdown NBA Draft Big Board was on the show a couple weeks ago, and he talked about, he watched Spagnolo in person in Europe last year and does think he could stick at point guard, like a big point guard at the NBA level. Right now, I think he's more of a scoring guard, can create his own shot, step backs, tough shots, sometimes takes too many tough shots. He's a good shooter, can also be a good secondary playmaker, and he's only 19. He's got great upside. I think he's a solid defender. He's got enough athleticism to stick at the NBA level in terms of his defense and his off-ball ability. I think it's tough to tell. And this could be actually an interesting, if he does get on the floor, to compare his athleticism and how is he defending and things like that in Summer League, which is, there's a lot of great athletes in Summer League. Shot selection, again, is kind of a thing, but he's also 19. And I think he could be a very good rotation piece as a combo guard type player. I actually think there's some similarities with the way that his strengths, I guess, to Jalen Noel. Noel's not an incredible athlete either. I don't think he's quite as athletic as Noel. I think he's probably a little bit of a better passer. And I don't know that he gets to the rim quite as well as Jalen Noel can. But there's some similarities there. And I think it's that type of a role moving forward where he could be kind of an off the bench scorer, initiate some offense as a secondary playmaker, but hopefully he plays. I think he'd be a lot of fun to watch in Summer League for Wolves fans. Okay. I want to talk about a couple of players. Let's first talk about the new guys on the roster, and then I want to get into a couple of other guys that I want to spend some more time on. There's two that are intriguing to me among the new guys. The one that I mentioned was Terrell Brown Jr. He is an undrafted rookie from Washington. He did average 22 points a game last year for Washington, but the previous season at Arizona hadn't done much. He scored a bunch at Seattle prior to that at the mid-major, but didn't do much at Arizona 2 years ago. Last year as a senior at Washington, he scored 22 points a game, but he was only 20% from three. Wasn't ultra efficient with his shots. He had a 32% usage rate, which is insane, and didn't provide much in terms of much else, like rebounding. He was a pretty good assist guy. The turnover rate's actually pretty low. So there are some things to like about him as a potential scoring guard, as an undrafted rookie. So Terrell Brown Jr. is an interesting name to keep an eye on, and probably will see some run as essentially a 5-year college player. Jordan Tucker is another one. He played in the G League last year. He started his college career at Duke, played a couple of years at Butler. So he's a couple of years out of school now. He's more of a two-way forward, not a big scorer, but athleticism, value as a cutter, good defender, some of those different things. Played 7 games in the G League last year, and the numbers don't really pop out at all. The shooting numbers aren't great. So he's more of a potential athlete, kind of in the Brian Bowen category, right? So a versatile defender who can cut and stuff on offense, but isn't putting the ball on the floor much in scoring, isn't spot up shooting. And then the last addition is perhaps the most intriguing to me in terms of the new players on the roster, and that's Jacob Gilliard. He was at Richmond for 5 years. He was a 5-year starter, played 154 games for the Richmond Spiders and started all 154. Obviously took advantage of that COVID kind of mulligan season. But unbelievably consistent. He averaged between 12.7 and 13.3 or 12.3 and 13.3 points per game each of the last 3 seasons. For his career, just over 13 points a game, 36% shooting from outside the arc. A solid defender for his size. He's he's quite diminutive. He's only 5'9". And I mean, I think if you were, call it 5-6 inches taller, he's probably a 2nd-round draft pick. Even given his age, he's going to be 25 here soon. He's actually the all-time NCAA steals leader. Now, being a 5-year starter will certainly help that. But the fact that if you're a steals leader all time in the NCAA, obviously that means it's something you're very good at. He's got extremely active hands. He's very crafty, and a solid defender for his size. Again, being undersized matters. We've seen how Jordan Mclaughlin is a solid defender one-on-one and does a good job trying to fight through screens, but sometimes his size is a hindrance. And Jacob Gilliard is smaller than Jordan Mclaughlin. But all that to say, all-time NCAA steals leader, 5 years starter or not 5-year starter, that's still an incredible thing. A very good pick and roll player. He's somewhat predictable in pick and roll, just kind of, either pulls up and shoots it or tries to get to the rim. His form's good, though. He's a good catch and shoot guy. Good pulling up in transition. He's a good shooter. Again, 36% for his career from 3 on decent volume. So there's a little bit of upside there. He's still almost 25 years old. I think of him a lot like Jordan Mclaughlin. He's a little bit smaller. He's maybe a little bit of a better shooter coming out of school. Mclaughlin was 4 years at USC, started most of the 4 years. Gilliard, 5-year starter at Richmond. Very good feel, just like Jordan Mclaughlin, can run the team, can be solid defensively. The only concerns are really his size, his age, and obviously he doesn't have elite athleticism either. He's a below the rim finisher type guy, like Jordan Mclaughlin, although J-Max, I think, surprised some people with his sneaky athleticism over the past couple seasons. So I think of him as a similar version of Jordan Mclaughlin. I'd say there's an outside chance he could be a two-way guy. The Wolves need another point guard, and he's polished enough as a 5-year college starter. There's a chance that if they like him enough, like him more than any of the street free agent options out there, perhaps they give Gilliard a two-way, but limited upside because of his age. But then again, I guess they did that with Jordan Mclaughlin a couple years ago. So he would be another name to keep an eye on, I think, here in Summer League as an experienced player that will see some run and has an outside shot at making an impact, whether it's maybe an Exhibit 10 player where he's in training camp with the Wolves. Maybe it is a two-way. But keep the name Jacob Gilliard in the back of your mind. You'll know him. You'll see him on the court. I mean, he's only 5'9", so he'll pop out immediately as the smallest guy in the court on Friday night. Okay, let's close the show by highlighting a couple of other players in the summer roster that we should definitely keep an eye on going into summer play. Players that I mentioned last week when I talked about the team, but I want to highlight here today as we go into the first game. First, though, let's talk about our friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. You can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including Major League Baseball. We're only a month away from NFL preseason, believe it or not, and that will be on BetOnline. I believe there's also Summer League action. I'll leave it there. I believe there's going to be a Summer League action on BetOnline, so go check that out. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sport wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. Plus, BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, other players to keep an eye on at Summer League besides Moore, Spagnolo, and Minot. I would say Phillip Wheeler, Exhibit 10 player. We talked a little bit about him last week. He's got very good size. He's 6'9" with a wingspan, I believe that's about 7 feet. He was a very good high school player in New Jersey a couple of years ago. There were some academic reasons he didn't go to college in the U.S. He played in Puerto Rico for a while. He's played a few different places professionally already, and so he's still fairly young. But he's another one of these kind of raw combo forward type players. He doesn't score much. He's not a great shooter. He can score off the dribble, but it's not tantalizing. He's not great off the dribble or anything. He's more of a cutter, more of an athlete, more of a lob threat in some ways, like Josh Minott. He can score a little bit down low. If you're not probably going to post him up much, the Wolves don't do a ton of that anyway. He's a pretty good rebounder. I think that's where his upside at the NBA level is an energy rebounder, a guy with a good motor. I think all those things are true. He's not the athlete that Minott is, to be clear, but he's a good enough athlete to play at the NBA level. There just isn't much in terms of touch offensively. He's not a great jump shooter. He struggles with contact a little bit, but because of the very good size, the decent athleticism, and the fact that he could do a few different things offensively, that's I think why he's still an NBA prospect. I think he's probably going to end up in the G League this year, whether or not it's with the Wolves. I mean, I guess he's an Exhibit 10 guy, so he's more likely to be with the Wolves than not. But he's interesting in that he was a big high school name on the recruiting trail prior to deciding to not go to school a few years ago. I guess he's 20 now, so that would have been 2 seasons ago, coming out of, I guess, in the middle of all the COVID stuff. So perhaps that had something to do with it too. But a name that you should watch for sure is Phillip Wheeler. Another one that I like is Marielle Sheak. We talked about him the other day. Sheak played briefly in the NBA with the Sixers a couple of years ago. He's kind of in that same vein, an athlete, can do multiple things, but he can shoot the three a little bit. So I'm excited to see Sheak. I'm hopeful that he gets some run on the summer team. So keep an eye out for Marielle Sheak as well. We talked about Keyvon Harris in terms of Exhibit 10 guys, a name that you should know. So those are probably the players to watch out for. The Wolves, I think in terms of minutes wise, it's always kind of tough to figure this out. The way they've done this in the past a lot of times is the guys they're trying to develop. So in this case, it's more, to a lesser extent, Minot and Spagnolo. They're going to give those guys heavier minutes. They may not play in consecutive games, although I don't believe the Wolves have any actual straight back-to-backs in the first preliminary portion of Summer League. You'll see those guys get some run, and you'll see the G League guys with experience like Lewis and Bowen get some run. And then they'll probably pick 2 or 3 of these, of the next level, the undrafted guys, to get heavy minutes in one game and then switch to another 2 or 3 the next game to kind of give them all a look. But hopefully Wheeler and Sheak would be the 2 that I'm most excited to see. And then Gilliard, the guard from Richmond, who they just added, the 5'9" guard. Those would be the 3. Deante, Burton, and Melvin Frazier Jr. both have NBA experience, so I'm not sure if that means like, hey, we know what we're getting from them, so they're depth guys and they're not going to play much, or we want them on the floor so we have some professional possessions, basically, with guys that know how to play. So that's always possible too. But it's a pretty good mix of undrafted guys on the roster and G League guys with some experience as part of this team. In terms of the Summer League schedule for the Wolves, as mentioned, they kick off here on Friday evening against the Nuggets. It's Summer League, but still, it's kind of funny. It's against the Nuggets at 8 p.m. on NBA TV. And then they don't play Saturday. They play Sunday at 8 p.m. on ESPNU, and then have Monday, Tuesday off, play Wednesday afternoon next week, and then they do play Thursday. So there's one back-to-back in there. So 4 games spread out over 6 days. And the first one, Friday night at 8 p.m. What we're going to do here at Locked On Wolves is I'll have a regular Monday show, and we'll talk a little bit about Friday and Sunday Summer League games, overall impressions. We're not going to do like a post-game for Summer League necessarily. But on Monday, the show will again cover both Friday and Sunday's games. What happened in those games? What are the key takeaways? Kind of high level type stuff. And then assuming that the 3 rookies play, Moore, Spagnolo, and Minet, then I'll talk specifically about those guys and anything else that stands out for the Summer League team. So that's what we'll do for Summer League. Of course, if they play, we'll cover it the next day on the show. The Wolves still have a couple of roster spots to fill, so keeping an eye on that as well. And obviously that'll take over the conversation if and when those spots do get filled. All right, that's all we have for you today. Thanks for listening and watching, perhaps on YouTube, Locked On Wolves. Of course, the show is available on YouTube, as well as any of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find this show. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. Of course, Locked On Wolves is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. And a reminder that for your second listen, you can listen to Locked On NBA. They get you up to date on the latest news and rumors in the NBA in just 30 minutes every day. Locked On NBA is your daily NBA update in just 30 minutes. Have a fantastic weekend. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.